Bienvenidas, bienvenidos. Let's talk about Niger. Niger has been in the news lately, and so I thought it'd be of interest to talk about the history and how we get to the present situation. But first, this is Latina Literati. If you enjoy amazing stories, wonderful people from past and present, and great books, then this is the channel for you. Niger is a very ancient land. There are remains there from a people called the Gobera people of more than 10,000 years ago. The Gobera people are connected to civilizations throughout Africa. They had amazing handicrafts and structures and lived along wetlands. They lived along lakes and rivers where there were hippopotamuses, crocodiles, all sorts of animals. Amazing place 10,000 years ago. Much before what we now call the desertification occurred, when the Sahara starts to push its way into Central Africa. Niger is the heart of Africa. It is surrounded by Algeria and Chad and Nigeria and Burkina Faso. And it really is, if you look at a map of Africa, it is in the middle. It is in the heart of Africa. It is an important place for human history, and it's an important place in current events. What we know of the Gobera people is from a very rich archaeological find. And as you see here, pictures of tools, a very sweet find of a mother holding the hands of her two children. The skeleton was found. So we know that they had elaborate tools. We know that they had elaborate different handicrafts. And we know that they depended obviously on the wetlands and on the rivers and lakes around them for their sustenance. So amazing. And you can look more into Gobera archaeological site to take a look at the amazing finds that they have found there. So again, we're talking about 10,000 years ago. So as the climate, as the Sahara starts to come in and the desertification process is occurring, things are drying out, and obviously people adapt. And so you have the people that were then called the Gobera, they changed to nomadic or semi-nomadic groups. And the groups that have lived there for several thousands of years include the Tuareg, the Fulani, and the Tombo. And here are some pictures of these people. Just beautiful in terms of their features and the way that they adorn themselves. The groups, I feel like they contrast the starkness of the desert with these beautiful textiles which they weave and trade. Just beautiful also body adornments that you see here. So the Tuareg, the Tombo, the Fulani have ancient languages, they have oral histories, they have music, beautiful stories of all sorts that they share from one generation to the next. And as semi-nomads, they actually move between different countries, what we now consider countries, different areas that allow them to flourish in these harsh conditions. And they have also large trade routes, and they trade with other groups. Several thousand years ago, as things begin to change, the waterways dry up, the desert starts pushing the people into nomadic conditions in order to survive. You also at that time have one of the greatest empires in Africa, the Songha Empire, that came and took the area under their dominion for many years, I think until 1591. And the Tuareg, who come from the desert. The Tuareg are known throughout North Africa. Some people call them the blue men because sometimes they use indigo to dye their clothing blue, and it is the men who cover their faces, not the women. The Tuareg are incredible. I had the opportunity to share a camel trek in the desert in Morocco with a Tuareg guide, so it was amazing to hear his stories and to hear the music. And when you're riding a camel, walking in the desert, there is no sound because the pads of the camel ensure that as you walk, there is no sound. Pretty amazing. So getting back to the history, I digressed. The Songha Empire controlled as far as Agadez until 1591, and then what we now know as the Tuareg controlled most of what is now Niger up until modern times. So Niger is one of the countries that is last seen or last brought into the colonist expansion of European powers. Quite interesting because, again, if you look at the map of Niger, completely landlocked, it's surrounded by huge swaths of land and mountains. So not much there. It was not until the 19th century that the Europeans wanted to know where were the springs that fed the Niger River. And if you look at this map of the Niger River basin, you see that it's huge. That the Niger River and its tributaries are responsible for the water to almost a dozen different countries, what we call countries now. So it's a major watershed, huge importance to many, many countries. But in the 1900s, first colonial expedition to find out where the Niger River began. And so that's the first time that you have Mashunga, as they're called in Africa. Mazunga, actually. Mazunga, M-Z-U-N-G-A, is the word for a non-black person in Africa. And what it means is those who walk in circles, because for the traditional societies, it would be very strange just to go for going's sake to somewhere else. So it's kind of like someone who likes to walk in circles. So the Mazunga arrive, and of course they want to take control. But Niger is a place where they're used to going where they want and doing what they want to do. And, you know, it's a place of nomadic groups, families, tribes, and they're not really interested in having anybody come in and tell them what to do. So there was one rebellion after another. Although France had a military presence in the late 1800s, it's really not until 1922 when there's a formal French colony. And by French colony, I mean a loose civil administration when you have people wandering in and out of the country as part of their nomadic life. So Niger gets its independence in 1960. So it's really not even 40 years of a French colony, so to speak. But France had a military presence before that, and it continues to this day. There are 1,500 French soldiers in Niger today. So they say it's to ensure trips over what they call the Sahel, which is the bottom half of North Africa. Whatever the excuse is, there are still French soldiers there. So France's presence is an integral part of the modern history of Niger, as it is with all of the colonies that France has claimed in Africa. Remember, Africa is the largest continent on Earth. I'm not talking about Asia because that's connected to Europe, but Africa is the largest and the richest. So even though the people may not see the benefit, Africa is a very, very rich continent. And Niger, as it happens, has one of the largest uranium mines. So you can guess what the French wanted in Niger. So a few weeks ago, the democratically elected President Mohamed Bazoum, was placed under house arrest, and the military took charge of the country. So this democratically elected president is deposed, and a military group calling itself something like Protection of the Fatherland or some name like that. Quite interesting group. I think there are 8 provinces in Niger, and 5 of those provinces are headed by military officials that were trained by the United States. So I think it's not necessarily what it seems. There may be other things going on behind the scenes that we're simply just not aware of. Unfortunately, for most of Niger's history since its 1960 independence, the military has held power. And even though France is no longer the official colonial power, France definitely has a quasi-empire in many of its old French colonies because, of course, it wants access to those resources. And so there are billions of dollars changing hands. There are French companies and officials that give quote-unquote aid to the government and to elites. And there are supposedly payments and kickbacks also to French officials. So again, there's lots going on that we're not hearing about in the news. And that's why this particular coup really fed into the anti-French sentiment, because here you have one of the largest mines on earth for uranium, and the people don't receive any benefit. There's a 37% literacy rate in Niger. So especially the young people who are mostly unemployed, were out in the streets, anti-French slogans everywhere and placards everywhere, and they're pivoting. The people want a change. They want an opportunity. They want hope for the future, as all people do. And so there are many placards that are asking for maybe trade with other countries like Russia, China, and Turkey, who are kind of seem to be stepping into the void where the anti-French sentiment is so high. It's also interesting to note that the currency of Niger was pegged to the French franc before the euro was used in the European community. It's now pegged to the euro. So again, hand in hand, this economic dependence on what France and Europe want is just part of the hegemony, part of what France does with its ex-colonies, expecting, absolute dominion in economic affairs. So is the coup in Niger simply the latest example of the people of Africa rejecting what several authors call the France Afrique, French Africa? It may be. There may be more to it that we're not being told. We can't really tell from sources that are available to us. What we do know, for example, is that the Wagner Group, mercenaries of Russia, have offered their services and training to those who held the coup in Niger. So that's something to think about. Pretty interesting that about 15 US trained officers have been part of a dozen coups in Africa. Again, of course, the US military says, we don't know why, we don't know how. It just so happens that all these officers are involved in coups in Mali and Guinea and Burkina Faso and Niger, and we don't know why. So anyway, there's a lot more here to digest than just what we're being told, obviously. But the important thing is that the people of Niger need an opportunity for self-determination and to forge their own path in their own traditions and respecting their own values. And hopefully that will be democratic values, but we don't know. So we'll see what happens. As I said, since 1960, for most of the time since then, Niger has been ruled by the military junta or group. So that doesn't bode well, but we'll see what happens. In 2007, the US establishes the Africa Command and starts really hands-on training of the military in 90% of the countries of Africa, and has spent, $3-4 billion. And that's just what we're being told, because all of the quote-unquote terrorist activities aren't included in the military budgets that we see. So I'm sure that it's much more than that is being invested in the military, supposedly to help the US fight extremists, but I'm not sure what it's doing. I think it would be better spent helping infrastructure and helping the people in education and basic services like water. I thought that it would be of interest to you to hear about the history of Niger, and I hope that you've enjoyed this. Now for my favorite part of the video, the book recommendations. The first book I wanted to recommend is a writing down of an oral history from Niger. Interesting that we can read a history that is 1,000 years old because it's been written down. The Epic of Askia Mohammed, and it is the tale of a ruler of the Songha Empire, as I mentioned, that had taken over not just Niger, but also part of what is modern Nigeria, and held it for many, many years. And so it is the story of that time between Timbuktu's rise in Mali and when the Songha Empire ends. And so it's fascinating to read the history of Niger through the words that have come down to us for 1,000 years. Really, really an interesting book. So I highly recommend it. And as always, check your library, check your local bookseller. If perchance it's not there, we always include links so that you can purchase the books if you'd like from independent booksellers online. The second book that I wanted to recommend to you, Engaging Modernity by Wausina Aidu. Really interesting. So this is a female perspective. This is women talking about how they are not being dominated. In fact, they are taking advantage of opportunity and seeing new ways to forge paths forward for their own lives and for their families in the new reality of Niger. So I thought that was a fascinating book as well to include in the book recommendations. The last book, the third book I wanted to recommend, is Still Waters in Niger by Catherine Hill. And so this is a story of an Irish woman who goes to visit her daughter, and the daughter is attending a clinic for women and children in a small village that is facing drought and food insecurity and all that that implies. And so it's a look at modern reality in Niger, obviously from a European perspective, but still the daughter is living day to day with women of Niger, with families of Niger. And so you kind of get a picture of village life when these circumstances and situations occur. So again, recommend the book, and I hope that you will enjoy it. So we would love to hear from you. We want to know what you thought of this content, what you would like us to talk to you about. We would love you to subscribe to Latina Literati. We are very, very close to 1,000 subscribers, so we'd love to get there with your help. We would also enjoy hearing what you're reading. Tell us what you're reading. What books are you enjoying these days? And as always, con mucho cariño, mucho salud y mucho amor. Gracias.